Welcome back to Valentra Tales, wishing you a truly good day, filled with calm moments and gentle things ahead. And now, let's step together into today's story.
Your authorization expired last week. Clean out your desk. The manager lied to get his friend hired. The next day, 2 military police officers entered the lobby. We are looking for the lead cryptographer, they demanded. The manager pointed to his friend. The officer shook his head. No. The one with the codes. Where is she? Your authorization expired last week, Marcus said, sliding the paper across the conference table with a smirk that made my blood simmer. Clean out your desk. I picked up the document. Company letterhead, Arial font, complete fabrication. My top secret clearance supposedly revoked due to administrative lapse. The same clearance I knew for a fact was active through March 2027. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that expertise and competence should never be replaced by politics and connections, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. This is fraudulent, I said calmly, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. The paperwork speaks for itself, Victoria. He leaned back in his chair like a man who'd already won. We need your badge, your access token, and the encryption keys. That's when I knew. He wasn't just firing me. He was trying to steal 12 years of work I'd built with my own hands. The digital fortress that protected 17 federal agencies. The system that only I knew how to operate. The keys aren't physical, Marcus, I said slowly. They're algorithmic sequences tied to my biometric profile. You can't just hand them to someone else. We have consultants who can handle the transition, he said dismissively, and I knew exactly which consultant he meant. His incompetent fraternity brother who thought firewalls were actual walls. I placed my badge on the table and walked out with my head high. Marcus thought he'd won. He had no idea he'd just activated a countdown that would bring military police to his door within 24 hours. Let me tell you how a woman who builds unbreakable systems taught a middle manager what real power looks like. My name is Victoria Hayes, and this is the story of the fortress I built. And the price Marcus paid for trying to take it. 12 years. That's how long I'd spent building encryption systems in a windowless vault that most people didn't even know existed. The kind of place where you pass through 4 security checkpoints just to reach your desk. Retinal scans. Fingerprint verification. Badge authentication. By the time I sat down at my workstation each morning, I'd been verified by systems that could spot a fake credential from a satellite in orbit. I'm a cryptographer for a defense contractor whose name I'm legally forbidden from speaking outside of a SEF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. That's government terminology for a fortress where classified secrets live. My job is to create the digital locks that keep those secrets from spilling onto the internet and causing international incidents. Satellite communications. Military networks. Intelligence databases. When they need to stay hidden, they go through encryption protocols I designed with my own hands. Most people don't understand what I actually do. When I tell them I work in encryption, they nod politely and assume I deal with passwords or email security. They don't realize I'm building invisible prisons made of mathematics, where one wrong calculation can mean the difference between national security and catastrophic failure. My father was a World War II codebreaker. One of those quiet men who never talked about his work but kept a leather notebook full of encrypted messages he'd solved using nothing but paper, pencil, and a mind that saw patterns in chaos. He taught me that codes aren't just about hiding information, they're about building systems that enforce their own rules without needing human intervention. When he died 6 years ago, I inherited that notebook. It sits on my desk now, a reminder that competence is built through discipline, not delegation. The morning Marcus fired me, I just finished the final authentication layer for Operation Nightfall, a communication grid connecting 17 federal agencies. It was the kind of system where one corrupted data packet, 1 microsecond of lag in the handshake protocol, could compromise the entire intelligence apparatus. My fingers had moved across the keyboard in patterns that would look random to anyone watching, but to me, it was composing a symphony where every mathematical note had to be perfect. The compile bar had filled green. Clean. Unhackable. Beautiful. I'd initiated my standard lockdown protocol. Biometric logout, token extraction, triple verification, physical disconnect. I never cut corners. Not once in 12 years. That kind of discipline is why I still had a job in an industry where one mistake can end careers. Or worse, end lives. That's when Marcus had appeared at my workstation, hovering like a vulture. Victoria, HR needs to see you. Conference Room B. Now. Conference Room B was a glass box designed for maximum humiliation. Everyone walking past could see inside, could witness your professional execution in real time. Patricia from HR was already waiting, her expression set in that weaponized politeness she used when delivering bad news. And then Marcus had delivered his fabricated termination, complete with his forged document and his smug demand for encryption keys he didn't even understand. But here's what Marcus didn't know about me. Here's what men like him never bother to learn about the people they're replacing. I don't just build systems. I build systems that protect themselves. 3 years ago, I'd implemented a fail-safe protocol buried so deep in the architecture that even our IT department didn't know it existed. A dead man's switch designed to trigger if the primary cryptographer was ever removed without proper federal authorization. It was meant to prevent hostile takeovers, foreign espionage, corporate sabotage. The kind of scenario where someone might try to force me out and steal access to classified military infrastructure. The system was simple. If Victoria Hayes's biometric profile was deactivated without confirmation from the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, the entire encryption grid would assume the facility had been breached. It would lock down every file, every database, every communication channel into an encrypted state that could only be reversed by the original architect. By me. Marcus had just fired me based on a forged federal document. He'd removed my access credentials without any legitimate authorization from the actual government agencies that monitored my clearance. And in doing so, he'd activated a countdown he didn't even know existed. Walking out of that building, I passed Tommy at the security desk. He was the elderly guard who'd been there longer than the building itself, a retired Marine who still carried himself with military precision. He looked at me with genuine sadness in his weathered eyes. "Take care of yourself, Victoria," he said softly. I paused at his desk, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Watch the cameras closely over the next few days, Tommy. It's going to get interesting." His eyes widened slightly and I saw the flicker of understanding. Tommy was sharp. He knew something was coming. I carried my small cardboard box through the lobby, just a few personal items, a photo of my father, my coffee mug that said, "There are 10 types of people. Those who understand binary and those who don't," and my small succulent plant that had somehow survived 12 years under fluorescent lights. Patricia had tried to get me to sign a severance agreement with a non-disclosure clause that would have prevented me from reporting Marcus's fraudulent termination to federal authorities. I'd refused. Walked out without signing anything. Left them with nothing but their forged paperwork and their inflated sense of victory. Marcus stood in the glass conference room watching me leave, practically radiating smugness. He thought he'd just streamlined operations, cut costs, made bold leadership decisions that would impress corporate headquarters. He had no idea what he'd actually done. Because I wasn't going home to process my shock and anger. I wasn't going to cry into a glass of wine or update my resume or feel sorry for myself. I was going directly to an unmarked building in Laurel, Maryland. A government listening post that doesn't appear on any public maps. The kind of place where people with clearances like mine go when the chain of command has been compromised. I had evidence. Server logs showing Marcus's unauthorized access attempts. Communications between him and Jordan about acquiring the encryption infrastructure. And most damning of all, the forged federal document claiming my clearance had expired. I also had something Marcus couldn't possibly anticipate. A chapstick USB drive in my pocket. The kind of spycraft engineering that looks like ordinary lip balm but contains 72 hours of complete system logs. Every failed login attempt. Every security violation. Every command Jordan would eventually type that would bring this entire house of cards crashing down. The drive sat in my jacket pocket, small and innocuous, containing enough evidence to bury Marcus under federal charges that would end his career and possibly his freedom. As I drove away from the facility I'd spent 12 years protecting, I allowed myself one small smile. Not from joy, I didn't want to lose my job. Not from satisfaction, watching someone destroy themselves is never pleasant. But from certainty. Marcus thought power came from titles, from authority to fire people, from corporate backing and fraudulent paperwork. He thought he could replace expertise with loyalty, competence with connections, 12 years of specialized knowledge with his fraternity brother's overconfident ignorance. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between management authority and actual power. About what happens when you try to dismantle a fortress while standing inside it. About the price you pay when you confuse a title with irreplaceable expertise. The system I'd built didn't need me to defend it. It would defend itself. Automatically. Mathematically. Inevitably. And by this time tomorrow, Marcus would be standing in a hallway full of federal agents, desperately trying to explain why he'd forged government documents and compromised national security infrastructure. I merged onto the highway, heading toward that unmarked building where people who protect actual secrets would listen to my report and activate protocols Marcus didn't know existed. The countdown had started the moment he slid that forged paper across the table. He just didn't know it yet. The unmarked building in Laurel sat between a tire shop and a shuttered convenience store, the kind of location designed to be instantly forgettable. No sign on the door. No company name on the directory. Just a street number and a reinforced steel entrance that could withstand a small explosion. I parked my car in the gravel lot and sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the steering wheel. The chapstick drive felt heavy in my jacket pocket, though it weighed less than an ounce. Funny how evidence can feel like carrying bricks. The door required a specific knock pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Old-school tradecraft that felt almost quaint in an era of biometric everything. A camera above the frame tracked my movement. 15 seconds later, the lock clicked open. Inside, the space looked like a dental office from 1987. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, cheap linoleum floors. A receptionist who could have been anywhere from 40 to 70 looked up from her crossword puzzle without particular interest. "Victoria Hayes," I said, placing my federal credentials on the counter. "I need to report a compromised chain of command." She picked up a phone, spoke 4 words I couldn't hear, and gestured toward a door marked, "Authorized personnel only." No clipboard. No visitor log. This conversation was never going to appear in any official record unless I wanted it to. The room beyond was different. Soundproofed walls. Electronic countermeasures humming at a frequency just below conscious hearing. A man in his 50s wearing a polo shirt and khakis sat behind a desk with nothing on it except a secure laptop. "Ms. Hayes," he said without introducing himself. "You've reported a security concern." I pulled out the chapstick drive and placed it on the desk. My employer terminated me this morning using a forged federal document claiming my top-secret/SCI clearance had expired. My actual clearance is active through March 2027. The termination was designed to remove me so they could install an unqualified replacement and gain access to classified encryption infrastructure I designed. His expression didn't change, but his fingers moved to the laptop keyboard. "Your clearance number?" I recited it from memory. He typed, waited, read something on his screen that I couldn't see. "Your clearance is active and current," he confirmed. "No pending investigations. No administrative actions. No revocation requests filed by any agency." He looked up at me with eyes that had seen too many lies to be surprised by one more. "Do you have the forged document?" I pulled out the folded paper Marcus had slid across the table just 2 hours earlier. He examined it with the clinical detachment of a pathologist studying diseased tissue. "This is fraudulent," he said simply. "Wrong letterhead format. No authorization codes. References a statute that doesn't exist." He photographed it with his phone front and back. "Who created this?" "Marcus Bennett, corporate efficiency consultant. He's been working with his former fraternity brother, Jordan Shaw, to take over the encryption operations. Shaw has no clearance, no authorization, and a documented history of incompetence at 3 previous employers." The handler plugged my chapstick drive into an isolated terminal that wasn't connected to any network. He pulled up the server logs, his eyes scanning lines of code and access attempts with professional speed. "These timestamps show unauthorized access to your workstation," he said, more to himself than to me. "Multiple failed authentication attempts. System queries pulling personnel files and salary data." He scrolled further. "Here's communication traffic between Bennett and Shaw discussing infrastructure transition and key acquisition." He looked up. "They were planning to steal classified encryption protocols." "They still are," I said. "Shaw is being installed as Chief Encryption Officer this afternoon." Marcus thinks the transition will be seamless. It won't be. The handler's voice carried absolute certainty. You built fail-safe protocols into the system architecture. Correct. I nodded. 3 years ago. If the primary cryptographer is removed without proper federal authorization, the system assumes hostile takeover and initiates catastrophic lockdown. Everything encrypts into a state that only I can reverse. He made several phone calls, speaking in the kind of abbreviated code that communicated volumes in single words. When he finished, he looked at me with something approaching respect. An asset preservation team will deploy tomorrow morning at 0700. We need you on standby for facility access and system restoration. He paused. Ms. Hayes, what you've reported constitutes federal fraud, falsification of government documents, and potential compromise of national security infrastructure. The individuals involved are looking at significant criminal liability. Good, I said and meant it. Maintain your normal routine. Don't contact the company. Don't attempt to access the system remotely. Let them make their mistakes. He handed back my chapstick drive. We'll handle this from here. I drove away from that forgettable building feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not satisfaction. This wasn't personal. Not vindication. I didn't need validation from anyone. It was certainty. The mathematical certainty that comes from watching a flawed equation collapse under its own logic. By the time I got home, Marcus had already started his victory lap. I sat in my apartment with my laptop open, accessing the system through maintenance protocols I'd built into the architecture 5 years ago. Backdoor access that looked like routine system monitoring, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look in the packet traffic. The main conference room camera showed Marcus standing at the head of the table, practically glowing with self-importance. The entire team was assembled. Engineers, analysts, IT staff, even people from accounting who had no reason to be there except Marcus wanted an audience. I want to introduce you to the future of our encryption division, Marcus announced, gesturing toward the door with the flourish of a game show host revealing a prize. Jordan Shaw walked in, and I had to suppress a laugh that would have sounded slightly unhinged in my empty apartment. He was wearing a black hoodie with "Hack the Planet" printed in neon green letters. His laptop bag was covered in cryptocurrency stickers and cartoon characters I didn't recognize. He had the kind of carefully cultivated stubble that required more effort than just shaving properly. "Sup everyone," Jordan said, throwing up a peace sign that made several people visibly wince. Ready to crush some code and modernize this legacy infrastructure. Legacy infrastructure. He was calling 12 years of custom-built quantum-resistant encryption legacy infrastructure, like it was outdated software you could update with a download. Sarah, bless her, raised her hand immediately. Jordan, welcome. I have a question about Operation Nightfall. The authentication deadline is Friday, and Victoria was the only one with the key generation protocols. How are you planning to? Jordan waved dismissively, cutting her off. Yeah, legacy systems are always overcomplicated. Some previous admin probably just over-engineered everything. He grinned like he was sharing insider knowledge. Honestly, we probably just need to reset the admin password and flush the old checksums. Fresh start, you know? The room went silent. Even people who didn't work directly with the encryption systems knew that what Jordan just said was catastrophically wrong. You don't reset military-grade encryption like you're fixing a frozen iPhone. I watched Sarah's face on the camera feed. She looked at Marcus, clearly hoping he would correct this disaster. Marcus just smiled and nodded like Jordan had said something brilliant. Exactly, Marcus agreed. Fresh perspectives. That's what we need. Victoria was too attached to her complicated systems. Jordan's going to streamline everything. The IT administrator, a guy named Kevin who'd been there almost as long as me, spoke up carefully. Just to clarify, the encryption keys are biometrically tied to Victoria's authentication profile. They're not something you can transfer or reset. The system generates them based on. We'll figure it out, Marcus interrupted, his smile tightening. That's why we brought in an expert. An expert who thought you could reset quantum encryption with a password change. Marcus checked his watch, still riding high on his power trip. All right, everyone back to work. Jordan, let's get you set up at your new workstation. And someone order champagne for 4:30. We're celebrating new beginnings. The meeting broke up, people filing out with expressions ranging from confused to horrified. Sarah lingered, clearly wanting to say something, but Marcus was already escorting Jordan down the hallway toward my old office. My office, where Jordan would sit in my chair, use my terminal, and attempt to operate systems he couldn't begin to comprehend. I switched camera views, watching them enter the server room. Jordan looked around like a tourist visiting a museum, completely disconnected from the reality that this wasn't just technology, it was the digital equivalent of a nuclear reactor. One wrong move and everything would melt down. "So this is Command Central," Jordan said, setting his laptop down on my desk. On my desk, where I'd spent 12 years building something that actually mattered. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "It's all yours now, buddy. Show them what fresh thinking can do." Jordan cracked his knuckles theatrically and logged into the terminal using administrative credentials that Marcus must have obtained through some combination of authority abuse and IT intimidation. I leaned back in my chair watching this unfold on my laptop screen. In a few hours, Jordan would start making changes. And when he did, the system I'd built would respond exactly as I'd designed it to. Not out of revenge. Not out of malice. Just mathematics. Just logic. Just the natural consequences of putting an incompetent operator at the controls of a machine that didn't tolerate incompetence. Marcus sent out a company-wide email at 3:47 p.m. Join us in celebrating operational excellence and bold leadership decisions. Conference room at 4:30. Refreshments provided. Bold leadership decisions. That's what he was calling fraud and gross negligence now. I closed my laptop and made myself dinner. Pasta with olive oil and garlic. Simple. Efficient. Perfect. By the time I finished eating, Jordan would be sitting at my terminal making his first catastrophic mistake. And Marcus would still have no idea that the countdown had already started. I finished my pasta and rinsed the plate, moving through the motions of normalcy while my laptop sat open on the kitchen counter. Camera feeds showing Jordan settling into my chair like a conquering hero claiming new territory. He propped his feet up on the console, shoes still on, crossing them at the ankles like he was watching television in his living room. Then he pulled out a family-sized bag of Cheetos and started eating while staring at the screens that controlled encryption for 17 federal agencies. Orange dust. On my keyboard. On my desk. On equipment that cost more than his car. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, watching this disaster unfold in real time. Jordan opened a terminal window and started typing. I recognized immediately what he was trying to do. He was attempting to pull code from GitHub, public internet repositories, into a closed SCIF environment that was isolated from external networks by design. The firewall rejected his request instantly. Error message, external connection blocked. Security protocol violation. He frowned, tried again with slightly different syntax. Same result. Stupid firewall, I heard him mutter through the audio feed. Kevin, the IT administrator, walked by and glanced at Jordan's screen. His face went pale. "Jordan, you can't access external repositories from inside the SCIF. It's a closed network. That's the whole point of—" "I know what I'm doing," Jordan interrupted without looking up. "I just need to disable some of these legacy security restrictions." Legacy security restrictions. He meant the protocols that prevented foreign intelligence agencies from injecting malicious code into classified military systems. Kevin opened his mouth, clearly wanting to explain why that was catastrophically wrong, but Marcus appeared in the doorway with coffee and that insufferable smile. "Everything going well?" Marcus asked. "Yeah, just familiarizing myself with the infrastructure," Jordan said, wiping orange Cheeto dust on his jeans. "Definitely some over-engineered complexity here, but nothing I can't streamline." Marcus beamed like a proud parent. Kevin quietly left the room. Sarah appeared a few minutes later, carrying a tablet with notes. She had that careful expression people develop when they need to deliver bad news to someone who doesn't want to hear it. "Jordan, I have some questions about the Operation Nightfall authentication sequence," she said, her voice professionally neutral. "The handshake protocol requires biometric verification from the primary cryptographer every 6 hours. And the next cycle is in," she checked her watch, 43 minutes. "How are you planning to handle that without Victoria's credentials?" Jordan leaned back in my chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. "Sarah, right? Here's the thing about legacy systems. They're built with unnecessary dependencies because the previous admin wanted job security. What we need to do is leverage agile methodologies to pivot the authentication architecture toward a more scalable, user-friendly paradigm. I actually laughed out loud in my kitchen. Agile methodologies. Pivot the authentication architecture. It was like listening to someone try to defuse a bomb using inspirational quotes from a business seminar. Sarah's expression didn't change, but I knew her well enough to see the horror behind her professional mask. So you're saying you don't have a plan for the authentication cycle that starts in 42 minutes? I'm saying we're going to innovate past the need for complicated authentication cycles, Jordan said, turning back to his screen dismissively. Sarah looked directly at the security camera in the corner. Looked right at me even though she couldn't know I was watching. Her message was clear. This is insane and we both know it. She left without another word. Jordan pulled up the classified operations manual I'd spent 3 years writing. Hundreds of pages detailing encryption algorithms, fail-safe protocols, system dependencies and security procedures. Mathematical proofs and implementation guides that represented the accumulated knowledge of my entire career. He skimmed through it like he was browsing a restaurant menu, scrolling past complex formulas and system diagrams with the attention span of someone watching social media videos. He opened a notepad and started making annotations. I zoomed in on the camera feed to read what he was writing. Next to the quantum-resistant encryption protocols. Simplify this. Too complicated. Next to the biometric authentication requirements. Unnecessary complexity. Remove dependencies. Next to the checksum verification system. Legacy bloat. Delete for optimization. He was planning to dismantle every security measure that made the system actually secure, and he genuinely thought he was improving it. Marcus walked by again, saw Jordan taking notes and nodded approvingly. That's what I like to see. Fresh thinking. Not just accepting the old way of doing things. The old way of doing things. He meant the way that had successfully protected classified communications for 12 years without a single breach. At 3:47 p.m., Jordan cracked his knuckles theatrically and announced to no one in particular, "All right, time to optimize some infrastructure." He opened a terminal with root access, administrative privileges that should never be used casually, and started typing commands. I could see exactly what he was entering, watching the letters appear on screen with the sick fascination of witnessing a car accident in slow motion. He was attempting to clean up unnecessary files, to improve system performance. The command he typed made my stomach drop. Delete all checksum files. Every single one. Those weren't unnecessary files. They were the integrity verification backbone of the entire system. The digital heartbeat that confirmed data hadn't been corrupted or tampered with. Without them, the system couldn't verify that classified information was genuine, unaltered, and secure. Deleting them didn't optimize anything. It told the system that the facility had been compromised by hostile actors and that all data needed to be immediately locked into an encrypted state that only the original architect could reverse. Marcus was standing behind Jordan, watching over his shoulder. "What's that do?" "Clears out legacy verification files," Jordan said confidently. "They're slowing down the system. Once we delete these, everything will run faster." "Sounds good," Marcus said. "Fresh start. Clean slate." "Exactly," Jordan agreed. His finger hovered over the enter key. I whispered "don't" to my empty kitchen, knowing he couldn't hear me, knowing he was going to do it anyway. He pressed enter. For 5 seconds nothing visible happened. The command processed silently in the background. Jordan smiled, satisfied with his optimization. Marcus patted him on the shoulder and walked away to check on the party preparations. Jordan had no idea that a 64-byte data packet had just been transmitted through an encrypted military channel, bypassing the company's internet infrastructure entirely, racing toward Fort Meade at the speed of light. My phone buzzed at exactly 3:18 p.m. The notification looked like a weather alert. "Severe storm warning for your area." I opened the encrypted app. A secure chat window appeared with designation codes instead of names. Handler 6. Vault compromise detected. Node Atlas 7 shows integrity failure. Did you authorize checksum deletion? My fingers moved across the phone keyboard. Architect 1. Negative. Terminated 0800 hours this morning. Current operators are unauthorized. Termination based on fraudulent documentation. Handler 6. Federal records show you as active primary cryptographer. No termination filed with DCSA. Stand by. I watched Jordan on my laptop screen, still smiling, still completely unaware that he'd just triggered a national security emergency. Handler 6. Asset Preservation Team deploying. ETA 0700 tomorrow. Maintain communications blackout. Do not engage with company personnel. Architect 1. Understood. I set my phone down and turned my attention back to the camera feeds. Jordan's screen was starting to show the first signs of catastrophic failure. File names that should have read encryption_protocol_7.dat were now displaying as random character strings. XK9$MP2 at QL5*NR8. Directory structures were collapsing. Access permissions were reverting to locked status across the board. Jordan's smile faded. He leaned forward, typing frantically. What the? Sarah walked by, saw his screen and stopped. Jordan, what did you do? I just cleared some old files, he said, voice climbing an octave. The system's acting weird now. What files? Sarah demanded. Just checksums or something. They were taking up space. You deleted the checksums? Sarah's professional composure cracked completely. Do you have any idea what those do? Marcus appeared, drawn by Sarah's raised voice. What's going on? The system is corrupted, Sarah said, pointing at Jordan's screen where file names were continuing their transformation into digital gibberish. He deleted the integrity verification files. So we restore them from backup, Marcus said dismissively. There is no backup, Sarah said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Those files were generated in real time based on the primary cryptographer's biometric profile. Victoria's profile. You can't just restore them. They have to be regenerated by the original architect. Marcus's face went pale. Jordan, fix this. I'm trying. Jordan was typing rapidly now, entering commands copied from what looked like a forum post on his second monitor. Nothing was working. Maybe if I restart the system. No. Sarah grabbed his hand before he could reach the power button. Don't restart anything. You'll make it worse. Jordan shook her off. I know what I'm doing. He reached for the main server rack and pressed the power button. Hard shutdown. No graceful exit procedures. No system checks. Just immediate, violent termination of every process running across 17 federal agencies. Sarah actually gasped. The screens went black. The server fans spun down to silence. And somewhere in Fort Meade, alarms were definitely starting to sound. Marcus stood frozen, finally understanding that something had gone terribly wrong. Jordan, tell me you can fix this. Jordan stared at the blank screens, orange Cheeto dust still on his fingers. It just needs to reboot. Give it a minute. In my kitchen, I closed my laptop and finished my water. The servers would reboot. The lights would come back on. And every single one of them would be pulsing red. Critical system failure, catastrophic data compromise, federal emergency protocols activated. Marcus and Jordan just didn't know it yet. But they would. Very soon. The server room fans were the first thing to spin back up after Jordan's forced reboot. A low whir that built gradually to a steady hum. Then the screens flickered to life, one by one, bathing the room in the cold glow of electronic resurrection. Marcus and Jordan both leaned forward, waiting for the familiar green status lights that would signal everything was fine, that Jordan's optimization had worked exactly as planned. The lights came on. Every single one of them was red. Not amber. Not yellow. Not the cautionary orange that meant warning, check this. Pure pulsing red. The color of critical system failure. The color of catastrophic compromise. The color that meant 17 federal agencies had just lost secure communications and someone was going to prison for it. That's not normal, right? Jordan's voice had lost all its confident swagger. He sounded like a kid who'd just broken something expensive and irreplaceable. Marcus stared at the screens, his face illuminated by the angry crimson pulse. Fix it. I'm trying. Jordan's fingers flew across the keyboard, typing commands with increasing desperation. Each one returned the same response in cold, unforgiving text. Authentication failed, architect access required. He tried again. Same message. Same message. Sarah had left an hour ago, walking out without a word after Jordan refused to listen to her warnings. Most of the office had emptied by 5 p.m., people grabbing their belongings and fleeing like passengers abandoning a sinking ship. Only Marcus and Jordan remained, along with Kevin, the IT administrator who stood in the doorway looking like a man watching a natural disaster unfold. "Kevin," Marcus barked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Get in here. We need your expertise." Kevin walked slowly into the server room, his eyes scanning the screens with the clinical detachment of a doctor examining a terminal patient. He read the error messages, checked the system logs, and examined the pulsing countdown timer that had appeared in the corner of every monitor. "What's that clock?" Marcus demanded, pointing at the numbers ticking downward. "What does that mean?" Kevin's voice was quiet, resigned. "That's the fail deadly protocol. These systems are designed to assume the worst if they can't verify legitimate access. If authentication isn't restored within 12 hours, they automatically purge all data to prevent enemy capture." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Enemy capture? This is Maryland, not a war zone." "The system doesn't know that," Kevin interrupted. "From its perspective, the primary cryptographer just disappeared. Someone deleted critical security files. And now unauthorized users are trying to access classified military communications. It thinks the facility has been compromised. So we prove we're authorized," Marcus said, grabbing Jordan's shoulder. "Show it your credentials. Your ID. Something." Jordan tried. He entered his newly created user credentials, his employee ID number, even his social security number in increasingly desperate combinations. The system rejected everything. "It's biometrically locked to Victoria Hayes," Kevin said flatly. "The system literally doesn't recognize anyone else as having authority to operate it. You'd have better luck trying to use someone else's fingerprint to unlock their iPhone." Marcus's hands were shaking now. "Then we call the vendor. The company that built this. They'll have a master override or something." The support contract was tied to Victoria's authentication profile, Jordan admitted quietly, not meeting Marcus's eyes. "When you revoked her access, the vendor portal locked automatically. It's a security feature. I found out when I tried to log in earlier." Marcus turned on him with sudden fury. "And you didn't think to mention that before you started deleting files? You told me to optimize the system." Jordan shot back. "You said fresh start, clean slate. I didn't tell you to break everything." Kevin cleared his throat. "Can we unplug the servers? Just shut everything down and start over." "No," Kevin said, and there was something almost sympathetic in his voice. "Battery backups. The moment you cut main power, the UPS systems kick in. And the fail deadly protocol interprets power loss as a hostile action. It accelerates the purge from 12 hours to 30 minutes. Marcus slumped into the chair Jordan had vacated, his expensive suit wrinkled, his carefully styled hair falling into his face. "There has to be something we can do." Kevin looked at the countdown timer. 10 hours and 47 minutes remaining. "You could call Victoria Hayes and ask her to come back." "I fired her," Marcus said, the words tasting like poison. "I escorted her out of the building. I told her she was a security liability." "Then you'd better hope she's feeling generous," Kevin said, and walked out of the server room. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed my number. I was sitting on my couch, reading a book about World War II code breaking that had belonged to my father. My phone lit up with Marcus's name and I declined the call without hesitation. He called again. Declined. Declined. He switched to text messages. I watched them appear on my screen one after another, each one more desperate than the last. "Marcus, Victoria, we need to discuss your severance package. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I deleted it without responding. "Marcus, there's been a technical issue with the transition. We could really use your expertise. Consulting rate, whatever you want." Deleted. "Marcus, please. This is urgent. The system is showing error messages. We need your help." I almost laughed at that one. Error messages. Like his car was making a funny noise and he needed a mechanic. "Marcus, name your price. Seriously. Whatever you want. Salary, title, benefits. We'll make it work." Now he wanted to negotiate. Now, after he'd fired me with a forged document and tried to steal 12 years of my work. I set my phone face down on the coffee table and returned to my book. Marcus apparently tried to find my home address next. Kevin had warned me about that in a brief, encrypted message. He's searching personnel files. Looking for your personal info. Good luck with that. People with clearances like mine don't have addresses in company databases. We have security protocols. Our personal information is redacted, protected, classified in its own right. Marcus would have better luck finding the nuclear launch codes. Around 8:30 p.m., Marcus apparently considered filing a police report. I knew this because Kevin sent me another message. He's talking about claiming sabotage. I told him the server logs show you haven't accessed the system since termination. Your commands are documented. Jordan's commands are documented. The timeline is clear. So that avenue was closed too. At 10 p.m., Marcus received an email from the CEO. I didn't see it directly, but Kevin forwarded me a sanitized summary. CEO received calls from Defense Department officials asking why Operation Nightfall showed critical failure status. CEO demanding immediate explanation. Marcus apparently tried to lie. Claimed it was temporary technical difficulties. Routine maintenance gone slightly long. Minor communication glitch. The CEO wasn't buying it. He'd been in the defense contracting business for 30 years. He knew what critical failure meant. He knew what federal oversight looked like. And he knew that routine maintenance didn't result in military officials calling his personal cell phone at 9:45 p.m. demanding answers. I made myself tea around 11 p.m. Chamomile with honey. I sat by my window looking out at the city lights and thought about my father. He told me once that good systems don't need human enforcement. They enforce themselves. Build the rules correctly, build them strong, and they'll stand up to any test. He'd proven that during the war, creating codes that held up under pressure even when the people using them made mistakes. I built my system the same way. Not out of paranoia. Not out of revenge fantasy. Just out of professional competence. The understanding that sometimes the person who built something needs protection from the people who want to take it. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Handler 6. Asset team deploying 0700 hours. Request you be available for facility access and system restoration. Bring authentication credentials. Architect 1. Confirmed. Will be ready. Handler 6. Subjects at facility have made multiple unauthorized access attempts. Purge protocol still active. Timeline. Architect 1. Current countdown shows approximately 6 hours remaining when team arrives. Sufficient time for proper restoration. Handler 6. Acknowledged. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be long. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m., brushed my teeth and climbed into bed. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, peacefully. Somewhere across town, Marcus was spending his last night as a free man on a conference room couch, checking the countdown timer every hour, watching his career and freedom evaporate with each passing minute. Jordan had apparently gone home around 3 a.m., his Uber receipt later becoming part of the evidence file. He'd fled the disaster he'd created, leaving Marcus alone with the red lights and the countdown and the complete certainty that everything was falling apart. At 6 a.m., Marcus tried calling me one final time. I was in the shower getting ready for the day. I heard my phone ring from the bathroom counter, saw his name on the screen through the glass door and let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. By 6:30 a.m. I was dressed in my navy blazer, my credentials in my bag, my chapstick drive in my pocket. I made coffee and drank it slowly, watching the sunrise paint my apartment in shades of gold and amber. My phone showed a news alert. Federal vehicles spotted at defense contractor facility. Developing story. The asset team had arrived. I rinsed my coffee cup, grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Marcus's long night was over. The reckoning had begun. The military police cruiser pulled into the parking lot at exactly 6:47 a.m., followed by 3 black Suburbans with government plates and a van bristling with satellite antennas. I watched from my car parked across the street, sipping coffee from a travel mug, as federal agents emerged from the vehicles with the coordinated precision of people who'd done this many times before. Tommy was at the security desk when they entered. I couldn't hear the conversation from where I sat, but I saw him straighten to attention. Old Marine instincts kicking in, and simply point toward the elevators without asking for credentials or signing them in. When federal agents arrive at a defense contractor at dawn, you don't slow them down with paperwork. I gave them 5 minutes to get upstairs and establish their presence before I started my own car. The lobby was eerily quiet when I entered at 6:55 a.m., flanked by the 2 MPs who'd been assigned to escort me. Their tactical gear and sidearms drew every eye in the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a coffee cup and it shattered on the tile floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I walked past the reception desk where I'd checked in every morning for 12 years, past the security turnstiles that had authenticated my credentials thousands of times, toward the elevators that would carry me back to the fortress I'd built. The MPs didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their presence communicated everything necessary. This wasn't a corporate matter anymore. This was federal jurisdiction. This was serious. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor and I stepped into controlled chaos. Federal agents in suits were conducting interviews in every available conference room. Technical specialists were photographing equipment and collecting evidence. Employees stood in nervous clusters, whispering to each other, trying to understand what was happening. And at the center of it all stood a woman who radiated authority like a furnace radiates heat. Special Agent Catherine Reeves looked exactly like her voice had sounded on the phone. Ice and iron forged into human form. Steel gray hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Charcoal suit without a single wrinkle. Federal credentials clipped to her belt where everyone could see them. She was speaking to one of her technical specialists, her voice low and clipped when she noticed my arrival. Our eyes met across the hallway. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, then turned back to her team. "We are looking for the lead cryptographer," Agent Reeves announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of anxious conversation like a blade through silk. "Who is the current authorized operator of the classified encryption systems?" Marcus emerged from the server room, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His suit was wrinkled beyond salvation. His expensive tie hung loose around his neck. His carefully styled hair stuck out at odd angles. His eyes were bloodshot and wild. He pointed at Jordan with a trembling hand. "That's him. Our chief encryption officer." Agent Reeves turned to look at Jordan, who'd apparently been summoned back to the office and was standing near the server room door in yesterday's clothes. Cheeto dust still visible on his hoodie, laptop bag covered in cryptocurrency stickers clutched protectively against his chest. She looked at him for a long, silent moment. Then she glanced at one of her technical specialists, a man with Marine Corps bearing who'd been examining the server room. He shook his head with an expression of barely concealed disgust. Agent Reeves turned back to Marcus, and the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. "No," she said quietly. "The one with the codes. The one whose biometric profile is embedded in the system architecture. The one who built this infrastructure. Where is she?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Jordan found his voice first, stammering desperately. I was told I'd be taking over the encryption systems. Marcus said it was just a transition." Agent Reeves raised one hand and Jordan stopped talking immediately. She didn't raise her voice. He didn't need to. The gesture carried absolute authority. Federal records show Victoria Hayes as the registered primary architect and sole authorized cryptographer for Operation Nightfall and 7 other classified communication systems, Agent Reeves said, her voice clinical and precise. Her clearance is active through March 2027. She was never removed from federal authorization. Her biometric profile remains the only verified authentication for system access. Marcus finally found words. "We received notification that her clearance expired. We have documentation." "Show me," Agent Reeves demanded. Marcus fumbled in his jacket pocket and produced a crumpled copy of the termination letter he'd given me yesterday. Agent Reeves took it, examining both sides with the careful attention of someone trained to spot forgeries. "This document is fraudulent," she said flatly. "It cites non-existent federal statutes. The format doesn't match Defense Security Service standards. There are no authorization codes, no official seals, no case numbers. It was never filed with any federal agency." She looked up at Marcus with an expression of cold disappointment. "Who created this document?" Marcus's face went from pale to gray. It was provided by corporate. No, wait, I might have." "You forged a federal security clearance revocation," Agent Reeves stated. "It wasn't a question. I was trying to cut costs," Marcus said, his voice cracking. The company needed to streamline operations. He was expensive. Jordan said he could do the work for half the salary. And how is that working out? Agent Reeves asked, gesturing toward the server room where red lights still pulsed their warning of catastrophic failure. Marcus had no answer. That's when I stepped forward, the MPs moving with me like shadows. The hallway went silent again. Employees who'd avoided eye contact with me yesterday when I'd been escorted out in humiliation now stared openly. Some looked relieved. Others looked ashamed. Sarah had tears in her eyes. I walked directly to Agent Reeves, ignoring Marcus completely, pretending he didn't exist. I presented my federal credentials, the real ones, issued by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency with proper seals and codes and authority. Agent Reeves, I'm Victoria Hayes. Lead cryptographer, clearance level TS/SEI, authorization number Victor Hotel 7773 Tango. She examined my credentials with professional thoroughness, comparing them to something on her tablet, then nodded with satisfaction. Ms. Hayes, we need you to restore the system immediately. He checked her watch. We have 38 minutes before the lockdown becomes permanent and 17 federal agencies lose all secure communications capability. I let the moment stretch. Let everyone in that hallway understand exactly what was happening. Let them see who actually had power here and who'd just been pretending. I would love to help Agent Reeves, I said calmly. But according to the paperwork Mr. Marcus provided yesterday, my authorization expired last week. I'm not qualified to access classified systems. Agent Reeves's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She understood exactly what I was doing. Ms. Hayes, she said, her voice carefully controlled, this isn't the time for games. It's not a game, Agent, I replied, pulling out my own copy of the forged termination letter. It's protocol. Mr. Marcus has official company documentation stating I'm not authorized to access these systems. I'm simply following his directive to the letter. To violate his order would be insubordination, possibly even a security breach on my part. I handed her the document. She glanced at it, then back at me, and I saw the faintest hint of approval in her expression. He understood. The trap was perfect. Marcus had used fake federal authority to fire me. Now I was using his own lie to refuse to help, forcing him to either admit the document was fraudulent or watch 17 federal agencies go dark. Either way, he was finished. Agent Reeves turned to Marcus, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet that was somehow more intimidating than shouting. Mr. Marcus, did you forge a federal security clearance revocation? It was just, we were trying to, Marcus stammered, his carefully constructed corporate confidence crumbling completely. Title 18 Section 1001 of the United States Code. Agent Reeves interrupted. Making false statements to federal agencies. 5-year minimum sentence. And that's before we add charges for compromising national security infrastructure, which carries additional penalties under the Espionage Act. She nodded to the MPs. They stepped forward, flanking Marcus on both sides. Marcus Bennett, you are being detained for questioning regarding fraud against the United States government, falsification of federal documents, and gross negligence in the handling of classified defense systems. Marcus's legs actually buckled. One of the MPs caught his arm, keeping him upright. I need a lawyer, Marcus whispered. You'll get one, Agent Reeves said. After we finish our preliminary investigation. The CEO, Mr. Brennan, had been standing near the conference room, silent until now. He finally found his voice, and it came out as a strangled shout. Marcus, what the hell have you done to this company? Marcus didn't answer. The MPs were already escorting him toward the elevator, each hand firm on his arms. He looked back once, his eyes finding mine, pleading silently for something. Mercy, intervention, help. I met his gaze with perfect calm and said nothing. The elevator doors closed on Marcus Bennett's career, his freedom, and his future. Agent Reeves turned back to me. Ms. Hayes, now that we've established the termination was fraudulent and your clearance is active, are you willing to restore the system? I looked at the countdown timer visible through the server room window. 34 minutes remaining. Yes, Agent Reeves, I said. I can do that. Then let's get to work. I walked into the server room, and the technical specialists who'd been examining the chaos immediately stepped aside. Not out of courtesy, out of recognition. They knew who I was. More importantly, they knew what I was. The only person in this building who could stop the countdown currently ticking toward total data obliteration. Agent Reeves followed me to the threshold but didn't enter. This was my territory, my domain, and she understood that well enough to give me space to work. Before I begin, I said, turning to face her, I need clear federal authorization on record. I'll restore the system under one condition. Her eyebrows raised slightly. What condition? The federal government acknowledges in writing that my termination was fraudulent, that my clearance was never actually revoked, and that I'm being recalled to duty under proper legal authority. Not as a favor to this company. Not as a contractor they're rehiring. As a federal obligation to restore compromised national security infrastructure. I watched her process the request. She understood what I was really asking for. Legal protection, formal acknowledgement, a paper trail that would prevent this company from ever claiming I'd abandoned my post or acted improperly. Agreed, Agent Reeves said without hesitation. As of this moment, you are operating under direct federal authority. The company is simply the physical location where the equipment happens to be housed. Your clearance is confirmed active through our independent verification. You are hereby authorized to take any necessary action to restore critical national security systems. She pulled out her tablet, typed something quickly, and showed me the screen. It was an official federal authorization order, time-stamped, digitally signed by someone whose title included the words, Deputy Director, and National Security. Sufficient, she asked. Sufficient, I confirmed. I sat down in my chair, the one Jordan had occupied for less than 24 hours, leaving crumbs in the keyboard and grease stains on the armrests. The screens surrounding me were absolute chaos. Cascading red error messages, countdown timers showing 29 minutes and 14 seconds remaining, system status reports from 17 different federal agencies, all screaming variations of critical failure and connection lost. I pulled the chapstick drive from my pocket and held it up so everyone watching could see it. Jordan was still standing in the doorway, looking like he desperately wanted to disappear but couldn't make himself leave. What is that? He asked, his voice small and defeated. This, I said, plugging it into the maintenance port I designed 5 years ago specifically for this kind of emergency, is the difference between someone who builds systems and someone who breaks them. The screen went black. Every monitor in the server room shut off simultaneously, and for 3 seconds, the only sound was the ambient hum of the cooling fans and Jordan's sharp intake of breath. Then a single line of text appeared in stark white letters against the black background. Architect authentication required. I placed my right hand on the biometric scanner. The same scanner Marcus had fumbled with yesterday morning, the one that had rejected him because he wasn't me. It read my fingerprints, palm geometry, and vein patterns in less than a second. I leaned forward and looked into the retinal camera, letting it scan the unique patterns in my eyes that no one else on Earth possessed. Then I spoke clearly. Nightfall Protocol, Architect Restoration, Authentication Hayes Victor 77 Tango. The system paused. 3 seconds of processing that felt like an hour. I could hear Agent Reeves breathing behind me, could sense the tension radiating from her technical specialists who understood exactly how critical these next few moments were. The screen flickered. Verified. Welcome back, Architect. Those 3 words. Words I'd programmed into the system myself years ago as a small piece of personal signature, brought visible relief to Agent Reeves's face. I saw her shoulders relax fractionally, saw one of her specialists exhale loudly. My fingers moved across the keyboard with the muscle memory of 12 years. I didn't need to think about the commands. They flowed naturally like a pianist playing a familiar piece. Abort purge sequence? Y/N. I typed Y. Restore checksums from secure backup? Y/N. I typed Y. Regenerate encryption keys using primary architect biometrics? Y/N. I typed Y. A progress bar appeared. It started at 0 and began filling with agonizing slowness. Each percentage point represented millions of calculations, terabytes of data being verified, encrypted communications being restored across 17 separate federal networks. 0%, 5%, 12%. The room was silent except for the sound of the servers working, their processors running at maximum capacity to execute my commands. 23%, 31%, 47%. The red warning lights began slowing their panicked pulse. The countdown timer froze at 4 minutes and 32 seconds. 4 minutes and 32 seconds from total, irreversible data destruction. 58%, 69%, 81%. The red lights shifted to amber. Cautionary yellow. The color of systems healing themselves, of crisis averted, of disaster narrowly avoided. 92%, 97%, 100%. System restored. All nodes operational. Zero data loss. The amber lights turned green. Solid, steady, beautiful green. The server fans spun down from their emergency speed to normal operational levels. The high-pitched whine that had been present since Jordan's catastrophic reboot settled into the familiar background hum I'd heard every day for 12 years. Status messages began cascading across the screens. Operation Nightfall, online. Secure communications, restored. Encryption integrity, 100%. All federal agencies, connected. I pulled the chapstick drive from the maintenance port, slipped it back into my pocket and stood up. It's fixed, I announced to the room. All 17 agencies are back online. Full encryption integrity. Zero data corruption. Zero information lost. Agent Reeves stepped into the server room, her technical specialists following. They examined the screens, verified the status reports, ran their own diagnostic checks. One of them, a woman with Marine Corps bearing and multiple security badges clipped to her belt, looked at me with something approaching awe. Ms. Hayes, she said quietly, we've been trying to develop fail-safe protocols like this for 3 years. Our best teams couldn't create anything this sophisticated. It took me 5 years to build it properly, I said. And another 3 to test every edge case. Systems like this don't happen quickly. Agent Reeves was reading something on her tablet, comparing it to the data flowing across the screens. When she looked up at me, her stern expression had softened into something that might have been respect. Ms. Hayes, what you just accomplished in 8 minutes would have taken our emergency response team at least 6 hours, and we probably would have lost 20 to 30% of the archived data. She paused. Your architecture is exceptional. Thank you, I said simply. She set her tablet down on the console. The Department of Defense would like to extend an offer of direct federal employment. Grade GS-14 starting position, with immediate elevation to GS-15 after your first performance review. No contractors. No corporate middlemen. You would answer directly to the Deputy Director of Defense Cybersecurity. Full federal benefits, pension, comprehensive clearance upgrades. Behind her, I could see Mr. Brennan, the CO, standing in the hallway. His face had gone from gray to white. He looked like a man watching his company's future evaporate in real time. Victoria, he said, stepping forward desperately, we should discuss a retention package. I'm sure we can match whatever they're offering. Agent Reeves cut him off without even looking at him. Mr. Brennan, your company's security contracts are suspended pending the outcome of our investigation. You have no authority to make employment offers for classified positions. You have no authority here at all. Brennan's mouth snapped shut. I turned to Agent Reeves and met her eyes directly. I accept your offer, Agent. When do I start? Monday morning. 0600 hours. Fort Meade. We'll have your credentials and facility access prepared. She extended her hand and I shook it firmly. Welcome to the team, Ms. Hayes. Brennan slumped against the wall, the reality finally sinking in. Without me, his company couldn't fulfill any of its federal contracts. Without those contracts, the company had no viable revenue stream. I was watching a multi-million-dollar business collapse in slow motion, killed by a middle manager's incompetence and greed. Agent Reeves's technical team was already beginning the formal evidence collection. They photographed every screen, documented every command Jordan had entered, captured every failed authorization attempt, every security protocol violation, every catastrophic decision that had led to this moment. Jordan was sitting on the floor now, back against the wall, looking like he'd just survived a car accident. Agent Reeves walked over to him, her expression professionally neutral but her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Jordan Shaw, you are being charged with unauthorized access to classified defense systems and willful destruction of federal property. I didn't know, Jordan whispered. Marcus told me it was just updating old software. He said Victoria had overcomplicated everything and I just needed to simplify. Ignorance is not a defense, Agent Reeves said, her voice merciless. When you're operating on classified military infrastructure. You had no security clearance. No authorization. No competence. That combination just destroyed your future. She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying to every employee still standing in the hallway watching this unfold. This company is facing suspension of all federal contracts, financial penalties that will likely exceed $40 million, and possible permanent disbarment from future government work. Brennan made a sound like he'd been physically struck. I watched all of this with professional detachment. No joy. No satisfaction. Just the quiet certainty of watching a system enforce its own rules exactly as I designed it to. Mathematics doesn't forgive. It doesn't compromise. It simply is. And Marcus and Jordan had just failed the most important test of their lives. The federal agents worked with the methodical precision of people who'd done this 100 times before. By 10 a.m., the server room was sealed with official yellow tape that read, "Federal Investigation. Do not enter." Technical specialists were imaging every hard drive, photographing every terminal, documenting every piece of evidence with timestamps and case numbers that would eventually be presented in federal court. The rest of the office had transformed into an impromptu interrogation center. Employees were being interviewed one by one in the conference rooms, their statements recorded on digital devices and transcribed in real time. I could see them through the glass walls, some nervous, some relieved, all of them understanding that their testimonies would determine not just Marcus's fate, but possibly their own careers. I was sitting in my old office, the one I hadn't entered since yesterday morning when I'd been escorted out in humiliation. Agent Reeves had given me access to collect my personal belongings while her team continued their investigation. Sarah knocked on the doorframe even though the door was open. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Of course." She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where we'd reviewed encryption protocols hundreds of times, where we'd solved problems together, where we'd built something that actually mattered. "I just finished giving my statement to the federal agents," she said. "I told them everything. Marcus's suspicious behavior over the past few weeks. The private meetings with Jordan. The way he dismissed every security concern we raised." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "I should have spoken up sooner. I knew something was wrong. I knew you were being set up and I said nothing. I stopped packing the photo frame I was holding. My father in his World War II uniform looking young and serious and certain. Sarah, you have a family to feed. A mortgage. 2 kids in college. I understand why you stayed quiet. That doesn't make it right," she said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But maybe next time you'll remember that silence enables people like Marcus. That looking away when you see something wrong doesn't protect you. It just makes you complicit." She nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm so sorry, Victoria." "I know," I said gently. "And I forgive you. But don't forget this feeling. Use it. Be braver next time." She left after a few more minutes and I returned to packing my belongings. My coffee mug that said, "There are 10 types of people in the world. Those who understand binary and those who don't." My small succulent plant that had somehow survived 12 years under fluorescent lighting, testament to the resilience of living things in hostile environments. Kevin, the IT administrator, came by next. He handed me a folder of printed emails. "I gave these to the federal agents," he said. "They're the email chain where Marcus explicitly ordered me to grant Jordan administrative access without proper clearance verification. I told him it violated security protocols. He overruled me, said he'd take full responsibility." Kevin's expression was bitter. "Guess he's getting his wish." "Thank you for speaking up," I said. "Should have done it sooner," he muttered, echoing Sarah's regret. The pattern continued throughout the morning. Employees stopping by to apologize, to explain why they'd stayed silent, to ask if I understood. I did understand. Fear is a powerful motivator. So is self-preservation. I didn't blame them for being human. Tommy appeared in my doorway around noon, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot like a kid delivering a school presentation. "The security team wanted to give you this," he said, handing me the package. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of the facility exterior, professionally shot, with the American flag flying in the foreground. Around the mat, the security team had signed their names with a message in Tommy's careful handwriting. To the woman who actually kept us secure. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I'd spent 12 years being respected for my competence, but this was different. This was recognition of something deeper. That my work had mattered to people beyond just abstract national security concepts. Thank you, Tommy, I managed. This means more than you know. He nodded, blinking rapidly. We knew you were the real deal, Victoria. People like Marcus come and go. But people like you're why this place worked. After he left, I sat alone in my office for a few minutes, letting myself feel the weight of the past 24 hours. Not the vindication, that felt hollow and unsatisfying. But the validation. The confirmation that I'd built something worth protecting, that my work had value beyond my own pride. I found Jordan in the cafeteria around 1 p.m. He was sitting alone at a corner table holding a cardboard box containing what looked like his laptop, his phone charger and a half-empty bag of Cheetos. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, staring at nothing. I sat down across from him. He looked up, startled, like he'd forgotten other people existed. I really didn't understand what I was doing, he said quietly. Marcus told me you'd overcomplicated everything. That the systems were bloated and inefficient. That I just needed to streamline and simplify. He laughed, a hollow sound without humor. I actually believed I was helping. I studied him for a moment. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't evil. He was just catastrophically incompetent and dangerously overconfident. A combination that had destroyed his future and nearly compromised national security. Jordan, I said carefully, there's no shame in not knowing something. Everyone has limits. Everyone has areas where they lack expertise. The shame is in pretending you understand when you don't. The shame is in faking competence when lives depend on your expertise. I just wanted to impress Marcus, he whispered. I wanted to prove I could do important work. Then you should have gotten the clearances. Taken the training. Spent years learning the systems before you touched them. I stood up. You can't shortcut expertise, Jordan. There's no app for competence. There's no tutorial that replaces experience. He nodded without looking up, and I left him there with his box of belongings and his shattered confidence. By late afternoon, news was spreading beyond the facility. The company's stock price had dropped 40% in 6 hours. Major clients were calling emergency meetings. The board of directors was in crisis mode, discussing everything from damage control to bankruptcy proceedings. Patricia from HR had been questioned extensively about the forged termination letter. According to Kevin, who'd overheard part of her interview, she'd admitted tearfully that Marcus had provided the document and pressured her to process my termination immediately without following standard verification procedures. She'd known it seemed irregular, but Marcus was senior management, and she'd convinced herself it wasn't her place to question his authority. By 5 p.m., federal prosecutors had filed formal charges. Marcus was released on bail with conditions that read like a list of his worst nightmares. Ankle monitor, surrender of passport, no computer access, no contact with anyone involved in the case, no leaving the state. His attorney, according to the news reports that were already starting to appear online, had reviewed the evidence and delivered grim news. The case was airtight. Digital forensics showing every command he'd authorized. Timestamps proving the document was created internally. Testimony from dozens of witnesses. The prosecutor's opening offer was 5 years in federal prison, permanent felony conviction, and financial restitution exceeding $800,000. Marcus's wife served him with divorce papers that same evening. The news spread through professional networks like wildfire. Nobody wanted to be associated with a federal criminal who'd compromised national security. His Georgetown alumni network scrubbed his profile from their website within hours. Professional organizations suspended his memberships. The company not only fired him but pressed their own charges for fraud and breach of contract. Within 48 hours, Marcus Bennett went from corporate efficiency consultant to unemployable felon facing federal prison. The transformation was so complete, so absolute that it almost felt unreal. I received updates throughout the weekend, not because I sought them out but because they found me. News articles. Encrypted messages from federal contacts. LinkedIn notifications showing mutual connections distancing themselves from Marcus's professional circle. I felt nothing watching his downfall. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Not even pity. Just professional detachment. He'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. The system had worked exactly as designed. Saturday morning, a thick envelope arrived via courier from the Department of Defense. Inside was my welcome packet. Building access procedures, organizational charts showing my new team of 40 cryptographers, briefing schedules, security protocols, and a summary of my new responsibilities. I spent the weekend reading, preparing, organizing my life around this new reality. Sunday evening, as the sun was setting, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. My father's grave was in Section 60, near other veterans of his generation. I placed fresh flowers on the headstone, simple white roses, his favorite. "I got promoted, Dad," I said quietly to the marble stone etched with his name and service dates. Turns out building something that actually matters is the best revenge. I thought about Marcus, about Jordan, about the company that had chosen politics over competence and loyalty over expertise. I felt no anger anymore. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that truth, eventually, always surfaces. That systems built properly enforce their own rules. That competence, in the end, is irreplaceable. I touched the cold marble one more time and walked back to my car. Monday morning would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new work that mattered. But tonight I could rest knowing that justice, mathematical, impersonal, and absolute, had been served. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything feel possible. I woke at 5 a.m. without an alarm, my body already adjusting to the new rhythm. By 5:30 I was dressed in professional attire that felt different from what I'd worn at the contractor. Less corporate performance, more federal purpose. By 5:45 I was pulling into the parking lot at Fort Meade. The facility was massive in a way that made my old workplace look like a suburban dentist's office. Multiple buildings sprawled across secured acres, surrounded by fencing that didn't just keep people out. It made a statement about what happened to people who tried. Guard towers. Patrol vehicles. Security protocols layered so thick you could feel them before you saw them. I approached the first checkpoint and presented my new credentials. The guard examined them with professional thoroughness, compared my face to the photo, scanned the embedded chip and nodded me through. Then came the second checkpoint. Retinal scan. Fingerprint verification. Vocal pattern recognition, where I had to speak my full name and authorization code into a microphone that analyzed the unique frequencies of my voice. By the time I reached the main building, I'd been authenticated by 6 separate systems, each one more sophisticated than anything we'd had at the contractor facility. My new office wasn't an office in any traditional sense. It was a command center. A room the size of a small gymnasium with wall-mounted displays showing real-time security status of every major federal network. Encryption integrity metrics. Threat assessments. Communication traffic patterns across 17 intelligence agencies. The kind of information that would make foreign governments kill for a single screenshot. My team was already assembled when I arrived at 5:57 a.m. 40 cryptographers, most of them younger than me but clearly selected for competence rather than connections. They stood when I entered, not out of corporate hierarchy but out of genuine respect for expertise. I walked to the front of the room and set my bag down on the console. "I'm Victoria Hayes," I said simply. "I don't care about politics, seniority, or ego. I care about one thing: building systems that don't break when they're tested. If you're here for titles and promotions, you're in the wrong room. If you're here to protect infrastructure that keeps people alive, we're going to work well together." The response was immediate. Nods of understanding. A few smiles. These were my people. Professionals who valued competence over performance, substance over style, results over resumes. A woman in her early 30s raised her hand. "Ma'am, we've been studying your architecture from the contractor incident. The fail-safe protocols, the biometric authentication layers, the dead man's switch implementation. We've never seen anything like it. It took me 5 years to build properly," I said. "And another 3 to test every edge case. Systems like that don't happen overnight. They require patience, discipline, and acceptance that perfection is iterative, not instantaneous." Agent Reeves appeared in the doorway at 6:15, carrying coffee and looking far more relaxed than she had during the crisis. She waited until I'd finished my initial briefing before approaching. "Welcome officially, Ms. Hayes," she said, extending her hand. "How's the team?" "Competent," I said. "That's all I need." She smiled slightly. I thought you'd want to know. Marcus Bennett took a plea deal this morning. 4 years in federal prison, permanent ban from government contracting, $850,000 in restitution. Jordan Shaw got 18 months and 5 years supervised probation. I absorbed the information without visible reaction. Thank you for letting me know. The company is finished, Reeves added. They'll announce bankruptcy proceedings by end of week. Without federal contracts, they have no viable business model. I nodded. It was exactly what I'd expected. Natural consequences following their inevitable course. By Tuesday, the news was official. The company that had fired me 3 days earlier was filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The CEO resigned effective immediately. The board voted to liquidate assets and settle debts. Employees received termination notices with minimal severance packages. 2 weeks for most, nothing for the executives who'd enabled Marcus's schemes. Sarah called me that evening. Victoria, I just got laid off. They're shutting down the entire operation. I'm sorry, Sarah, I said and meant it. I was wondering. She hesitated. Would you be willing to provide a reference? For federal positions. Absolutely, I said without hesitation. Send me the contact information. Within a week, Sarah had 3 job offers from different defense contractors. Ones with actual respect for security protocols and professional competence. She accepted a position with better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, better leadership. The office building where I'd spent 12 years went up for sale in March. The server room I'd built was dismantled by federal technicians who documented every component for evidence preservation and future analysis. Equipment was auctioned. Furniture was liquidated. By May, the company that had chosen efficiency over expertise, loyalty over competence, and politics over security simply ceased to exist. I read about the final bankruptcy filing in a federal intelligence briefing. My old workplace had become a case study, an example of what happens when organizations prioritize short-term cost savings over long-term security infrastructure. Anonymous, of course. Sanitized for classification purposes. But anyone in the industry who followed the news knew exactly which company and which incident was being referenced. I felt no satisfaction in their destruction. Just professional observation. They'd made choices. Those choices had consequences. The market, like mathematics, doesn't care about intentions. 6 months into my new position, I was invited to brief senior Pentagon officials on encryption infrastructure vulnerabilities. The room was full of people with stars on their shoulders and decades of military service. I was the youngest person there by at least 15 years and the only woman. I stood at the podium and spoke with the same directness I'd always used. Systems are only as secure as the people who maintain them, I began. You can't outsource expertise. You can't replace experience with enthusiasm. You can't substitute loyalty for competence. I clicked to my first slide. A sanitized case study of what had happened at the contractor facility. No names. No identifying details. Just the timeline of decisions and consequences. The threat isn't always foreign adversaries, I continued. Sometimes it's managers who don't understand the systems they're dismantling. Sometimes it's hiring friends instead of experts. Sometimes it's choosing optics over operations. I walked them through the cascading failures. The forged document. The unqualified replacement. The catastrophic commands. The near-total loss of secure communications across 17 agencies. We need to build systems that enforce their own security, I concluded. Systems that automatically reject incompetence regardless of authorization level. Systems where expertise is non-negotiable and competence cannot be faked. The room was silent when I finished. Then a 2-star general in the front row started clapping, and the rest of the room joined him. My recommendations were adopted as formal policy within 3 months. All critical infrastructure positions now required verification of actual expertise, not just credentials. Biometric authentication tied to proven competence. Automatic alerts when primary architects were removed without proper federal authorization. Victoria Hayes's architecture became the template for next-generation security systems across all 17 agencies. My father's code-breaking legacy continued through my work, protecting a nation that would never know my name but depended entirely on my expertise. 1 year and 2 days after Marcus had fired me, I received a LinkedIn message notification on my phone. The sender's name made me pause. Marcus Bennett. I opened it out of curiosity. The message was long, rambling, full of apologies and excuses and explanations. He wrote that he'd never understood what I actually did. That his actions were driven by ego and misplaced ambition. That he saw now how wrong he'd been. He asked if there was anything I could do to help with his legal situation, maybe provide testimony about his character, maybe explain to the prosecutors that he hadn't meant to cause harm. I read it once. Then I deleted it without responding. There was nothing to say. Marcus still didn't understand. Power isn't something you can beg for, manipulate, or steal. It's something you build through years of expertise, competence, and irreplaceable value. I closed LinkedIn and returned to my current project. Designing quantum-resistant encryption protocols that would protect classified communications for the next 50 years. Work that mattered. Work that would outlast me. Work that no one could take away because it existed in my mind, in my training, in my experience. I thought about the military police who'd arrived looking for the one with the codes. The recognition that titles meant nothing when systems failed. The truth that authority comes from being essential rather than being in charge. I'd never raised my voice. Never made threats. Never sought revenge in any traditional sense. I'd simply built something so critical that removing me was like removing the foundation from a building. The structure had inevitably collapsed. Not because I'd sabotaged it. Because competence, once removed, cannot be replaced with confidence and connections. That's the architect's true power. Creating systems where expertise is non-negotiable. Where competence cannot be faked. Where the machine itself enforces truth regardless of human politics. The system always knows who built it. The system always protects its architect. And the system, when designed properly, always wins. I saved my work, locked my terminal, and prepared for tomorrow's briefing. There was always more work to do. More systems to build. More infrastructure to protect. And I was exactly where I belonged, building fortresses that couldn't be stolen, designing security that couldn't be faked, creating architecture that would stand long after I was gone. Marcus had wanted power. I had built something better. I had built something real. If this story of calculated justice had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when the military police asked, "Where is she?" And every eye in that hallway turned to Victoria. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.